All right, guys. So portfolio reviews. I'm gonna be doing a series of videos of just doing general portfolio reviews of the people that have submitted it. Now, again, I think a lot of people have actually a lot of people have submitted their portfolios and sending some of their work to me. So I apologize. I have a puppy here that is looking for attention. This is Layla, but um, I'm gonna keep this very casual. And one of the things that I'm really trying to do with these portfolio reviews is to no abajo no, is to really try to give feedback that is maybe what you wouldn't get on a regular portfolio review. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but a lot of times I've been doing portfolio reviews for many years, and it's usually a general case where some of the feedback that you give is pretty similar all across the board, right? It's very rare to find a situation where you have to give like a very unique sort of mind blowing critique or thing to say about the artist, right? A lot of the times it's just mostly the same, uh, which is kind of good because we know that a lot of people are in the same situation. But I'm gonna try to talk maybe sometimes about things that maybe you wouldn't hear in a regular portfolio review. And since there's so many of you guys, I'm gonna do a couple of you guys on each video, but I'll also probably just talk about just one thing in your portfolio that I see. They could be many things. Of course, I'll talk about the great things that you're doing, but also the bad. I don't really want to sugarcoat things. I don't like sugarcoating things because personally, if I'm getting a critique from somebody, I want them to be as honest as possible because that's what's gonna help me, grow. And so I'm really gonna try to um, um, be as honest as possible about the things that I see, but it's just probably gonna be one or two things, and then you can, take it as you go. So we're gonna start here. I'm gonna do let's do one, two, three, four, five of you guys on this video, and we're gonna start with Omar here. Now, um, Omar. Oh, so another thing is that I ask you guys to give me your portfolio, of course, and also your goals because I think it's very important for me to know where your head is at in terms of like what your goals are, because that's really gonna tell me quite a lot about your mindset, about where you are, where you want to go, and that sort of thing, right? And the other thing is it's also practical because if you want to work for X, Y, and Z company, their critique could vary depending on what you're doing in your portfolio and that company's work, right? So I'm not gonna really critique something that you're doing a Pinterest if you wanna work for a stylized company rather than a more realistic company, right? And so this also brings in the side of where you're at in your terms of like your mindset, like how you're thinking about going with things in your portfolio, like your strategies and all that. And so it's very important for me to know that. So I think most of the feedback, if not all, is gonna be based on what you told me, what your goals were, and where you were, and that sort of thing. So Omar, sorry, just to sort of in a general sense, he wants to just get a concept art job, freelance work in games or movies, and he does want to work on the photorealistic cinematic art style, and he's been taking concept art classes, just building his portfolio, applying for jobs, and also growing his social media presence. He's feeling a little stuck, can't find work. He doesn't know how to, or unsure how to approach the industry. Now, I think in terms of approaching the industry, I think you're doing the right thing. A lot of the times we get to a place where we're not getting what we want, in this case a job or a client or anything like that, and a lot of the times is things that we cannot control, right? It's just the timing of things. Maybe they don't need our skills even if we have the amount of skill to work for that particular client or company. And so sometimes it's just a matter of just continue doing what you're doing. And I think this is going to be relevant to a lot of the portfolio reviews that I'll be doing. Just keep doing what you're doing, and of course keep growing. But you're doing the right thing. It's just a matter of timing. And so in this case, I agree. He wants to work in the photorealistic cinematic art style, which I can see very clearly from his stuff here, which is great. And so I think the right mindset is in the right spot. Now, the I want to talk two main things about Omar here. One of them is this is gonna be more of the technical side of things, and let me bring my pre-rev here. So, and again, we can take a look at some of his work here. It's got some shots here. This is probably um, the most successful thing in terms of like concept art, right? So if you want to be a concept artist, you have to be able to iterate, you have to be able to create ideas. It's not really about the pretty pictures, about the good design and the good problem solving issues of design, right? And how you put that visually, right? It's really more about this, right? Than having to do with like um, final paintings and all that. We got some of his work here. So this stuff is great just for concept art per se. Another one here. Now, I want to stop on this one because I want to dive into a little bit of this. And one of the things that I want to talk is well, every time you construct something as a concept artist, um, you have to get as close as possible to make it look like, especially if it's something like it's built by a human, right? Like some of this high tech stuff or anything that is architecture or anything like that, that we know that somebody constructed this, whether it's alien or human or whatever. We have to think about the functionality about it and about also the parts that get used to build whatever the part of the environment is, right? And I'm gonna use this as an example now, right? Because for example, when I look at this, like I think this is going to like the big shape and some of the medium shapes and the proportions and where you're having some of the detail and all that. But a lot of the details here, when I look at them, like I'm not sure what they do. And this is a thing where when you're illustrating this, you don't have to become an engineer or anything like that, but you have to sort of make it look like it could be something that has some function, right? And we'll take a look at some examples in a second here, but some of this stuff, what I want you to try to avoid, whether you're doing it or not, I'm just sort of like assuming here, is that I don't want you to do things arbitrarily, right? So if you're doing a bevel, or if you're doing an extrude, or if you're doing a piece of part that you're adding to something, I want you to think about the function of why you're adding that, instead of just adding it just because maybe it looks cool, right? Because I think it requires a lot of skill, like somebody that is a veteran, to do just like random stuff, things that look cool, and then add function to it. I always like to think about the function, like if I'm putting a piece of architecture, a piece of stone, or a piece of top on a wall or a window, I'm thinking why I'm putting it there and thinking about the function and how it works in order for me to justify that action, right? And so when I look at some of this artwork here, which I think are super successful, right? Everything here, even though when I look at this piece, everything that I'll see here, even though me as a person don't know exactly what the purpose is, I can look at all the details and I understand that it has a purpose, whether I know it or not. And I think subconsciously, your audience, art directors, or the public is going to really subconsciously understand that when they look at it, whether they know it or not. And so we have to get as close to that as possible so we can make our concepts believable and make them look like, oh yeah, somebody actually built this, because it actually looks like, it got built. And so um, I would really just like really think very thoroughly about, all the things, all the design decisions that I'm making when I'm building something, to give it some sort of function. Um, So that's sort of like more on the technical side. Now, on the other side is that you mentioned that you trying to grow your social media presence. Now we're in times where you as an artist can sort of have a living by just doing art online, like just have like an audience in on Instagram, YouTube, whatever, and grow your audience and get money from that and live off of that, right? By making content and video. But one of the things that I'm trying to address, especially lately when I'm talking to students, is that you have to really think about who you want your audience and who your audience is, right? And somebody that lives in social media, like creates content like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, that sort of thing, their audience is going to be most likely different than if you want to work at a company, right? Because you could have a really cool style of art, right? That maybe not is not necessarily needed or useful in a company or in a game or in an animation or movie, but a lot of people like it online, and so you have a bunch of followers, and so you get money with ads and whatever the case may be, right? But if you're trying to attack two different audiences, it's going to be really hard for you to grow at a rapid state, because you're trying to do two different things. And so I think you have to, it doesn't, I'm not saying that you cannot do it, but to me, when I think about it, if I was at my stage and I'm trying to figure out which one, I'm gonna try to decide the path of the fastest way possible, right? And to me, working on one skill is faster than working on two, three, four, five skills, right? Because to be a content creator, you need a bunch of skills, right? You need to edit, you need to, create the videos and spend time on social media posting and scheduling and advertisements. So you're going that way, right? And so um, I'll be careful about where you're spending the time, because that's also time that you have to spend doing that, right? So it's not the same as making a huge portfolio piece, then making that and also recording videos and editing and posting and dealing in social media and all that stuff, right? And so I think you have to um, sort of decide which audience you want to go with. And if you want to do both, that's totally fine. But you also know you gotta understand the consequences or the repercussions of that. It just might take you just longer to reach the goal of art that you want to do. And so it's really hard now because, and this is something I want to just talk about. Is just because it's really hard to just when you're trying to get into industry, but then you see all these artists that have artwork, right, and they have hundreds of thousands of followers, and you're like, oh, they're getting seen by all these people, but it's not really in this. It's not really about the quantity of your followers; it's about the quality of the followers. Because I will have 100,000 followers, but maybe there's 5 art directors there that love seeing my work, and every time they have something, they call me up because they see me posting stuff, or they see the artwork and they just like it, and they have a project that fits it. And so um I think now you can also take one of the two directions, which is something that we didn't used to have a couple of years back. So I think it's a matter of making a decision and working in that direction. um so let's move into the next person, which is Yvette Rosario. She's from Puerto Rico, and she already works in the industry, but she wants to work for companies like Wizards of the Coast and also Larian. So they did Baldur's Gate, and we're gonna pull up her portfolio here. Now, she mentioned that she wants to work for those two companies. She wants to prepare for application of that type of company. And let's see what else. And yes, you just wanted to get some feedback on her portfolio and how to prepare for that. Now, I like that she is very clear about who she wants to work with, because now that gives me just a clear understanding on where she's at looking at her portfolio, but where she needs to go by looking at her goals. And so if we take a person like her that wants to work for those companies, we can just really just look at the company's work and what they do and sort of compare the two and see what we're missing and what we're doing right. And so let's take a look here. So The this is some of her work, some studio work at the Kuren studio that she works at. Some of the call she's a 3D character artist. Now she mentioned she's a character artist, but you also have to. One of the first things that I'm gonna say is that when you look at a company and say you want to work for Wizards of the Coast or Larian or whatever, you have to see what sort of work they do in house, right? Because sometimes companies they release product or any type of visuals or anything like that, and a lot of times is third party companies or other outsourced companies that they do, right? So for example, in our case, when Wizards of the Coast, we don't really have a 3D character artist, right? We don't have that. We just have concept artists. There's only four of us in there, so it's very rare to get an opportunity to work as a concept artist unless we're growing the team. And so being a 3D character artist is not really an option to work for Wizards of the Coast, like in the studio of Wizards of the Coast. Now you can work in product related from Wizards of the Coast, but now you gotta find the companies that does that type of work. So for example, like if you see a cinematic from one of the Magic the Gathering new releases, then you gotta find what that company is and then attack them instead of just Wizards of the Coast, because it's a third party company or outsourced company. And so the main thing that I want to say or talk about, there's going to be two things here. One of them is that when you're working in a portfolio and you're at the stage where you're sort of like, oh, I want something different. I want to change companies. And it's a pretty big shift from what you're currently doing. My suggestion would be is that you curate your portfolio as much as possible, right? So if you want to work for companies that look like this, right? So this is I think it's from Baldur's Gate, I think. Maybe I could be wrong. But this is from Magic the Gathering. But your work is like this, right? So when we compare the two, we can see the difference, not necessarily in quality, but also like the style and the approach of it. Then I wouldn't even have a portfolio to show to those companies because it's really unrelated, right? And so I would start just thinking about everything that I'm gonna be doing from this point on and forward. It has to try to reach this level because this is where I want to be, right? And so I will look at the company's work. I will look at the artists that do work for that company. I look at the work, and I will really just literally just imitate what they're doing into my own work to try to get to this as close as possible. And then I can just start building up that portfolio and putting those pieces and then showing them to that. Now I understand, like, um, if you're looking for a job and maybe you don't have a job right now and you're getting jobs with this style, then yeah, you can keep it, but just sort of like keep it to those particular clients. Because the other problem is that if you have this, and even if you start doing those new pieces with a new sort of style and those companies in mind, and you start putting them here, you might get more clients that like this sort of stuff here. So you will get hired for those instead of for the new stuff. And so when you have such a huge range and difference in your portfolio, it's really a gamble in what you're gonna get hired for. And so you might get hired for something that you might not enjoy as much anymore. So it's a little bit tricky for that. And so I'll be really careful and really clear about where the stuff that I put in my portfolio, that is the stuff that I want to get hired for. Now, if I put myself in your shoes, if I was in your situation where I'm already working in a company where maybe I don't love the work, maybe I'm working for one of these studios and I just want something different, but I already have a job, I can get, I'm getting my bills paid, I'm earning money. I will literally just revamp everything, right? Because I already have the job. I don't need the portfolio, unless I get laid off or anything like that. Then I just go back to that. But if I'm already in a job, I'm getting money, I'm getting my bills paid. I literally just delete all my portfolio, and just in every single free time that I have, I would just work on stuff to attack this over here, right? And so it might take me a year, it might take me 2 years, it might take me 3 years, but we have to understand that in order to get something, we have to sacrifice something, right? And so if I have a full time, I have to sacrifice my free time in order to gain this new thing, right? We cannot really have the best of both worlds. We have to sacrifice something. And so in this case, it will be something like that where I would just do my 9 to 5, let's just call it that. And on every single time that I have free, whether it's before work and after work or weekends, I know that I would just work really hard to get to this point. And I would work in silence. I don't have to start showing everything that I'm doing. Like I'm just working. And then in the amount of time that it takes me, then I can just build that portfolio, maybe 1 to 3 pieces, and then start showing that new sort of side of my art into the world, pretty much, right? And so that's probably the way that I will tackle it. But again, you have to know, if you're doing 3D character art, you have to know, and research the companies that do that type of work. All right, so let's go to the next one. This is going to be Alessandro. Probably I said that right. Now, Alessandro is working right now as a freelance concept artist in a small video game studio. He's doing environment and prop design and for them, small gigs for the clients as well. So he's freelancing, but he wants to work in a bigger studio in house. I'm not sure which one yet. And so let's take a look at his portfolio here. Now, one of the things that I'm gonna mention, if you don't know which bigger studio you want, I will probably start there. So I'll probably start defining which ones, because that's really gonna determine the type of work that you're doing, right? And so, or that you're gonna show them and put in your portfolio. And so I think that's gonna be super critical, about your journey, defining which one you want to. A lot of times as artists, we're just doing art, and we're just doing our thing, quote unquote. But I think a lot of times, if you want to be, let me put this here. I think if you want to be, and this is just like a general thing, I think if you want to be more strategic about your career as an artist, I think most artists need to think more about the companies and their needs instead of, oh, I like to do this type of art, which is kind of weird to say, because when you're in art, you're doing your art because you enjoy it, but at the same time, this is sort of like a marketplace, right? You have to think, also about the client and their needs, and how you can supplement their needs. Now, I think you can bridge the two and have some harmony there, but a lot of times you have to risk a little bit of your own personal stuff in order to attract more of the marketplace if you're struggling in that area. Some artists that don't need to do that. Some artists need to do that more. But having that in the back of your mind, just thinking about, okay, if I want to work for these companies, maybe I need to shift my art a little, just so it fits a broader, bigger pool of clients instead of just a little niche of clients. And so, now, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just sort of going on a tangent there. Now, I see his work, like, as soon as I see here, like, I can see that he works professionally. So I'm not really, this is one of those cases where you just need to define where you want to go, and just like who you want to work for, and then gear your work towards that company. Because I think everything I see here is great. I don't have any big issues, like, technically or anything. I know he can, like, I love seeing this, iterations, concept design, but also having good understanding of taking an image from 0 to 100, right? Like, I love all these variations. Technically, if I were to say something, like, I would just spend more time rendering the actual materials to make it look like the materials themselves, which is something that with time you're just gonna get better at. Whatever is stone, whatever is metal, grass, and all that, just to make it look more closer to that material. But I love all these iterations, and one of the things that I wanted to mention here, if you go to his stuff, is that there's gonna be two things. One thing is that, again, depending on who you want to work for, right, and the type of art that you want to do, when I look at this image, Composition is fine. Like all that is good. My main concern was that I see a lot of um, sort of realistic textures, but also a lot of brush strokes, right? And so it's not that you cannot have both, but you have to do it in a way that it's harmonizing throughout the whole image, right? And so I'll give you an example. When we were working on Castlevania, when I was working on Castlevania, the backgrounds there needed to be look realistic, right? With realistic lighting and all that, very similar to this, but also have that painterly effect. But it was throughout the whole image. And so I had a huge struggle at the first couple months because I was used to doing a lot of realistic textures and photo bashing, and so during the first couple months there was a lot of feedback from the art director to me in order to paint more the whole image because I was doing a lot of what you're doing here, and so it was a process for me to learn. Okay, I need to really just paint, go throughout the whole image and get rid of that very noisy, realistic sort of texture, and add my own sort of brush strokes and all that stuff. And it took me time to sort of marry the two, right? But that's something that you can do here because, for example, I see this area here and these strokes and some of this stuff here, and it's sort of taking away, like there's sort of like two opposites like pulling to each other. Like I don't know which one you want to go. And so I would really neither of them is right or wrong, but I would just concentrate on either doing one of them right. And so you could start with a very realistic and not go to the painterly, but I would do it throughout the whole image, which might take a little bit longer because you got to paint more. But one of the things that you could do if you're going that route is, instead of doing, and this is more of a technical tip, if you're a person that wants to do more of the painterly, you want to paint more, but you're using 3D and textures and stuff like that. One of the things that I do is I take out the normal pass. Like I don't use the normal pass because the normal gives you that noisiness and that really textury, realistic. And I would just probably use the color and the roughness, and then I'll play with that. Because if I have the normal, then I have to paint more to get rid of the noisiness, and that way I can just concentrate on the painting part. And if you want to go more in the realistic, then you just use that, and then you make it as best as possible in order for you not to have to paint on top of it. And so when I look at some of these, so like some areas, like if I break up areas, like if I just look at this, like this looks almost super like painterly stylized, but when I look at this is like realistic, right? And so you don't want to have that contrast in your image. It's either one or the other. But in terms of like designing and laying your details, like in terms of your design, like I think you're doing great. It's just a matter of continue doing that and utilizing that style that you may want to go for. The other tip that I might give you is that when I look at this, it reminded me of this artworks from Falling Order, which I think are great. And all this is great. Like I don't have any critiques of like the design and the idea of it. But what I would try to do is I will bring, and again, this comes back to the type of style that you want to go, is that to bring some of the um, high frequency small details into it, maybe like a 10% or a 15% into this, because your big shapes, your medium shapes are great and the design is great. And so if I take a look at here, I understand the big shape, I understand some of the medium shapes here, but then I have all these little details that add to the design, that next level of believability into the work. And there's some real life references here, but also here, right? We got the big shapes, the medium shapes, and then we got the little things. And it's not like you have to fill the whole design with that. It's just we need to have it. We need to have it in a way that enhances the design per se. And in some of these spaces, like you are doing that, right? Here and all that. But I think we can add just a little bit of that into that. But again, I think this is great work. I think it's just a matter for you to define what that goal is and who you want to work for. And when I say who you want to work for, a lot of times in most cases, I don't mean like a specific company, right? I mean more of a industry, right? So if I think about, um, Diablo 3, right? The game. I'm not really thinking about this. Like, you don't want to think just Blizzard, because then your chances of getting that job is just comes way lower because it's just one. But there's a lot of companies that do Diablo 3 like games, same style, same type of game, same sort of genre, that you will have a bigger pool, right? And so when I say about, oh, think about a company, I'm mostly think about an industry and sort of like a general sense of that particular product. So let's go to the next one. It's going to be Alex Wright, and he's been trying to break into the industry for about a year and a half. He went to illustration, but discovered concept art, so he wants to be a concept artist now. He's currently freelancing and applying to jobs, and he's spending time forwarding his skill. And let's see. All right, so he's doing jobs that don't really fulfill him, and he wants to create art for a living. As simple as that. Um, so this is his work here. Now, when you say, when I hear I want to do art for a living, that's such a broader, term. I understand what you're saying, but I think it's getting a little hot here. I understand what you're saying, right? But I think a lot of times when we define things for ourselves, like goals and things that we want to accomplish, we want to try to be as clear as possible and as specific as possible, right? Even though we understand, but I think clarity, is power. And I think when you have a clear, very specific thing to go for, it's a lot easier, and it's a lot more. The chances for you to attain it is way higher than if you just go in a general sense. Now you're saying you want to be a concept artist. Now I do see that your illustration, sort of background is into some of this stuff, right? And so we have to, for everybody that wants to be a concept artist, you have to, and you're doing this type of work, you have to make that little shift of from illustration to concept art, because concept art is really just about designing and solving design issues. Very similar to what you're doing here, which is great. I love this. But for example, if I'm an art director and I jump into this image, like this doesn't really tell me much as you as a concept artist. Like this doesn't tell me as much, right? Or if I look at this, like yeah, I can see that you can compose an image, you understand composition and all this stuff, but neither of this really tells me that you can, if I give you a design problem, that you can solve that problem, right? Um, this here is a different story, right? So this is getting more into that realm, and I want to focus on this thing here because I think this is a very similar stage where the first person, Omar, that we took a look for his portfolio. That's one of the things that I want to talk about. But the other thing is that I took away this here just to talk a little bit about it, because when we give iterations to clients or art directors, we want to make sure that there is there's quite a bit of a change, a good contrast between each option, right? If you're doing an illustration, we want to make sure that there's a different camera angle, it's a different pose, all that stuff, right? Because we want to give a broader, bigger option. And maybe if they ask for, oh, maybe let's try a couple different color variations for the shirt or something like that, then we can go into that. But when I do variations of different, I want to give you options to my work or to my clients. I want to make sure that there's a big difference between them, just so they have a good range for them to choose. And this almost becomes like one of those games where you have two images and you have to figure out what's the difference between the two images. Like you don't want that to have that feeling between your iterations, because and again, I see the difference here on the scale of the characters and all that, but the buildings is the same, some of the shadows and there's not that much of a bigger difference, right? I will probably have multiple designs of the structure, and also maybe different camera angles or different camera lenses into the work. And that way, we know that we're showing that we explore different ideas. Now, the other thing is very similar to what we were talking about, Omar, is that I think that you have the right idea of tackling the way you tackle this instead of having iterations um, and making like here, like all these iterations are great. Like I think this is just great. But we have to think again about how, if we were to construct this in real life, like how will it look, right? If these pieces are attached to this, like how does that get attached? Like how does it work as an overall design, but also the individual parts. And if we look at some of these um, very successful designs, like I can see here, for example, this piece, like how it goes inside the leather, and there's all this layering here, which subconsciously I don't know why, like why we have to make it that way. But when I see it, I immediately understand. Oh yeah, that works, right? Even though I'm not sure exactly how. And so when I look at all this stuff, and how this leather here parts are like covering part of this because this might be inserted, and I'm already thinking that maybe the whole metal part is like inside here and all the mechanism and all that stuff. I look at it and I can visually see that it works. Same with this, like how this sort of um, hosting is attached to this. It's not just a host into a wall like that, right? There's some sort of mechanism there to maybe tighten it or maybe make it fit into there with the bolts and stuff. Like the individual pieces that this has, like I know that if I take some of these bolts off, this whole bottom piece sort of comes out, right? And it exposes like the rest of this particular piece here. So um, when I'm designing something that is man-made, I have to think about all those things and try to incorporate that as much as possible into my designs. And so I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, because if you continue doing all these iterations and all that, like you could just continue building your concept art portfolio, but we have to think about the design and how we can make it more believable um, to the audience as well. And also, if I mean, and again, a lot of the um, a lot of the feedback about portfolio and curating your portfolio, I think this speaks to everyone, and so that's also sort of like a general tip. Some of the stuff, like for example, studies. Like I would never have studies in my portfolio, um, just because as studies are studies like for your own study, right? It's not really for attacking a client, so I would take those out, and I would just have probably just best um your best work. Like, oh, this is great. Um, I will have to see more of this. Like, I want to see, also want to see how these things are attached to the rock. Like, how does that work? Like, yeah, I can see some um pieces of wood is holding some pieces, but um I see that and I'm like, I don't think that's enough, right? I don't think that will work in real life. And same with let's go to this one here. Yeah, like this is probably your best looking concepts that you have here. I love this. The shape is great. The shapes are great. Materials are great. I'll just have more of this. Like, this is great. And I'll probably expand. I would even, a lot of times, and this is another thing. Like when you have, and this might be more of a personal choice. Like I'd rather see this project without this image here. I would have loved to see more of this as a concept artist, not so much this. And I totally get it. Like I know we want to get to this, right? Um, but sometimes it's no. Sometimes it's just better for our portfolio to keep here unless until we get to like a really good um skill level in order to portray our concepts in an illustration form like this, like a movie shot or something like that. It doesn't mean you don't need to practice it or anything like that, but for portfolio purposes, I almost want to see just this, more of this here than this. Um, yeah. So those are my thoughts on that. Let's go to the next person and last. This is going to be Juan Pedro. Um, now Juan says his goal is to work for AAA games. Doesn't matter which one, but I want to be on the credits for a game. He likes to do different stuff. So I'm still adding different things on my portfolio, but I want to focus mainly on environments. He now works as a um, working as a concept artist for advertising, but he doesn't like it, which I totally get it. Um, and let's see. Remember, that's why this year, the lowest skill, get the chance to work on one day. Okay, good. So he wants to work on games, AAA games. He doesn't know which one. Again, this comes back to being um, um, very specific about the goal, right? Um, and I think one of these, I was looking at your portfolio earlier. I think in your case, it's just, well, first it will be defining where, right? And the type of games that you want to work on and all that, be as specific as possible. And then after that, it's just doing more of that because I technically, like in terms of technique and the technical stuff, like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Like you're doing iterations, you're doing concept art, you're doing cool images, you're designing, like all this stuff is great. Um, but I think it will be just a matter of just doing more of that and with the direction, the clear direction of where you want to be, right? And who you want to work for. So it's I think it's so important, and this is probably gonna be my main takeaway from this particular session is that to be you have to be clear about your goals. Like there's no there's no general sense to me, and this is all personal opinion. You have to be as clear as possible with your goal because clarity is power. And if I know where I want to be, if I can see it, I know I can trace that path or figure out an easier path to get there. Um, and so it's very important. But technically, like I don't have any huge like big issues with you, right? With your level of skill, I think you can um, you can conceptualize, you can create images, you can iterate, and you can design stuff. I'm not too concerned about that. It's just a matter of the direction and your clarity about your goal. So that would be my recommendation to you. You know, just in a general, just to talk about general here. If you're in a spot where you know you got the skills, right? You got the skills to uh, to generate art. You compare it to other artists that are in the industry, and they're sort of like right next to each other. Like it does work. It's just a matter of doing more of that. And if you don't, let's say you have problems with like coming up with unique ideas or anything like that, like just pick like a IP that you really like and you're super excited about, and just recreate and redesign a bunch of stuff from it, right? Like if you were working in the studio, and this is, I mean, this is what I did for a long time. Like I pretended that I was working for X, Y, and Z company, and I was like, oh, they asked me to redesign this stage, or they have this new expansion that they're going to go into this world or new area, and I just get to design it, and I would just do that, right? Sort of pretend that that I was working for them already, and that will give me a lot of material to work with, but also I get excited because I'm working for the company, quote unquote, but I'm also doing work related to the industry and building up my portfolio as well, and also showing them that I can do this, right? And so and I know we live in crazy times right now, but we have to continue moving forward, no matter what, and just finding ways to add more value to the companies as artists that we are. And so this concludes this first session. Again, I'm gonna do a bunch of different sessions. Again, I got a bunch of portfolios. I may not look at all of them because it's just quite a lot, but I'm gonna try to get them as much as I can, and I will see you guys in the next one.